I just want to start by thanking everyone for coming out. There's a lot going on in the world, and a lot of things you could be doing other than nerding out with us. But I also want to say that I've deeply appreciated the creativity and critical theory that's just in the air at SFAI. Since I'm third presenting, I just want to continue this tone of serious academic rigor. So I was at this party, and this grad student was talking about protest art and art to make change, and said social practice was the new kitsch. I was bewildered by the statement. This was a sort of last straw in a series of experiences wherein the art that I was heavily invested in was looked down on in classes and critiques as overly didactic. I myself, was heavily invested in graffiti culture. The gallery I opened was called Anti-Oppression Art. That's me with a cigarette hanging out of my mouth. I was, and still am, about art that is of and by the people, street art, graffiti, protest art, etc. I considered myself a protest artist and viewed revolutionary art as having the highest functionality, and thereby viewed it as the highest art form. So I was walking around, shout out to Wassam. I was walking around the financial district of SF with Wassam, my longtime friend. We were complaining about these condescending sentimentalities when we realized that to a certain extent the work we were doing, or that I was doing, was underpinned or pinned down by powerlessness. My work, found in alleys and barbershops and protests, was in one register framed by a lack of power. Wassam and I realized that works like the pyramids testify to a kind of power, wealth, or just general greatness that could not be found in our work. So I wondered, what if we flip back that kitschiness that gets heaped on to makers like us? What if we depicted the powers that be as punk-ass kids getting arrested for graffiti, or doing art about how they wish they could have their power back? I realized that this world would have to exist in the future, a sort of future that we would like to see, but when I took paint to canvas and tried to depict this in a believable manner, I realized that I didn't know what the future would look like, and worse yet, I didn't even know how to thinking about the future. So with some research, I discovered Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute. It's headed by Nick Bostrom, who is best known for his work in anthropic bias, observation selection effects, and science and philosophy, existential risk, which is his term, not to be confused with existential philosophy, his term for threats to humanity. Impacts of future technology. He has a New York Times bestseller called Superintelligence, and implications of consequentialism for global strategy. So in a nutshell, when you're trying to predict the future, you want to, 1, be right, 2, avoid your own biases, and 3, be super intelligent, which is to say, have a good grasp on forthcoming tech. They came out with this book, Global Catastrophic Risks. I don't have time to go into detail on this occasion, but I've uncovered several instances of bias among this group, claiming to have what they term formidably wide-ranging expertise. But suffice it to say that the group's expertise is not as formidably wide-ranging or diverse as they put forward. That same book, there is, on their website, I clicked on this person, like, oh, that might not be a white dude. So this is their administration section. And the website states, although Rapuliu is a member of the Mensa Society and has studied computer science and has completed postgraduate studies in business administration and a number of courses in AI, logic, mathematical philosophy, and game theory, according to the website, she manages the financials and the human resources. FHI's forward-thinking staff in 2016 is ostensibly as white and male in both composition and outlook as the room at the Royal Institute of Science in which the forward-thinking H.G. Wells gave his speech a century ago. What speech, you might ask? This speech. This is a drawing by H.G. Wells. He called it a masterpiece. So, I mean, I don't want to waste too much time on this stuff, but basically, H.G. Wells thought that there would be a bifurcation, like that we see in the Time Machine. He actually thought that was going to happen, and that like Europe, he used the phrase "within our loins" would be the people who would become those who would stand on the earth like it's their footstool and reach to the stars. So I started thinking, I mean, like, this wasn't painting a clear enough picture for me about what we were finna do and what's the world gonna look like. So I tried a different method. I Googled it and got this stellar definition and an example sentence of exactly what Google via the Oxford English Dictionary, again an Oxford connection, thinks of our finna. The example sentence for gonna is "we're gonna win this thing." Obviously this was insufficient, so I decided to embark on elucidating the term finna for laypersons whilst laying out the beginnings of how we might begin to think about what we finna do. So in the first of three parts, finna as thought process, to be fixated on, to construct a mental model, to will, to manifest, to think about doing something, to be in the act of self-fulfilling prophecy, as in, I'm finna make it happen. So Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, mathematically expressed as delta x, which is position, delta p, momentum, is greater than or equal to Planck's constant, that funny looking h, over 2, is used to explain the observer has an impact on the behavior of electrons. Heisenberg used the science/logic of determinism to show that the mere act of observation impacted the behavior of subatomic particles both forward and backward in time. This was a watershed moment in classical physics, which was built on determinism, a la Isaac Newton. An object in motion stays in motion, an object at rest stays at rest. So Niels Bohr, you'll see the equation is identical. Niels Bohr arrived at the same equation, but realized a point that actually Heisenberg acquiesced to, that what was causing this was because of the indeterminate nature of the universe itself, and not simply an observer effect. So my thesis argues that epiphenomenalism, the view that the physical world overdetermines the phenomena inside our brains, is could be done away with, or needs to be like revisited. Quite notably, a relation of complementarity between energy and time exists as well, where you could swap out delta x and delta p for delta E and delta P energy and time. And since higher dimensions are curled up at the Planck length, which is smaller than the quantum level, which is smaller than our brains, I argue that we have more agency in the fourth and fifth dimensions than we realize. If we could fully unpack the physics of causality, the physics of decision-making among quantum and cosmic phenomena, then predicting the future would simply be a matter of doing the math. Sadly, we are a long ways away from that kind of computing power. Even the best chess computers aren't really that good. Just for an example of like how bad this problem is, the amount of possible chess games that could be played is 10 to the 125th power. There's a lot less interactions that could go on in a chess game than could go on in amongst subatomic particles in our minds. So meanwhile, back in 1917, W.B. Du Bois wrote a fictional account of a black sociologist 200 years in the future who used calculus from sociological data to create a crystal ball. The crystal ball suffered from a kind of glitching or interference, at which point the sociologist realized there were beings of another dimension affecting macro-level socio-historical phenomena. He then invented the megascope, which was basically a mixed reality device, not unlike the Oculus, which showed the viewer what Du Bois called the great near and the far small. The megascope immersed the viewer in this other world, the world of what Du Bois called the overmen. Based on our current capabilities, our forecasting in the near future will be largely predicated on our ability to amalgamate disparate systems of understanding, e.g. astronomy plus sociology plus chemistry plus meteorology, economics, etc. So section 2, fixing to as in preparing to or creating the circumstances that will lead to something in the future, making a way toward, engineering, setting in motion, as in I'm finna come out with this 5,000-year almanac on some Benjamin Banneker 3.0. This section begins with 3 counter examples to dispel the expectation that present-oriented outlook correlates with either the level of existential urgency or emergency for an individual or the amount of historical oppression an individual has experienced. So the first counterexample involves this one time I almost died. And while I was dying, I was, like, first of all, freaking out. But I was also thinking about my daughter, mostly. Her past, present, and future. Sentimentally, existentially, and politically, I realized that I hadn't taught her everything I wanted to, and that no one would pick up the slack in many areas. But it's important to me that in a life-threatening situation, I was forecasting, analyzing the future and past, and began to face the present circumstance because of the analysis that ensued. Hetero-patriarchy, capitalism, racism, and my immediate relationships influenced the decisions I made and the ways I moved my body. So it turns out, after all, that I did not die, and but I was cognizant of all these things, along with mundane details, moment by moment, and before I had ever heard of Afrofuturism or futurology, predictive analytics, or the Future of Humanity Institute. My outlook on the past, future, and present all interacted dynamically in my thoughts and actions when I presumed myself to be dying. The second case involves my grandmother, Dolly Ruth Jones. She was a devout Pentecostal. She and the rest of our family believed the age of prophecy to have been over with centuries ago, and otherwise find superstition to be abhorrent. Despite all this, Grandma Jones would have these fish dreams wherein she would predict women's pregnancies, sometimes before the women even knew they were pregnant themselves. This was done with 100% accuracy, which is a pretty good standard for science, I'd say. Her ability to dream and predict ran against the patriarchal and theological leanings of the church, and it was not particularly amplified or diminished by historical oppression. Which is to say that, to some extent, dreaming is simply what we do. The rest of the Finna as preparing section traces the past and present of Black social movements, in which I assert that Black leadership is increasingly horizontal because of the growing consciousness of centering the margins as revolutionary praxis. On the shoulders of Black feminist scholarship, we are seeing the emergence of Black femme leadership, as well as queer and trans and intersex leadership. And I would argue that this notion of centering the margins will increasingly entail that activism have a global outlook. Knowledge systems related to Ubuntu I am because we are will eventually supplant ergo cogito sum. I think, therefore I am. I'm hoping that in the information age, in the digital world, intersectionality and ephemerality will become increasingly valued, such that when we think of a leader or when we think of a knowledge bearer, we think of those who know the face of oppression with the most clarity. I'm hoping that in the years to come, we look away from power, away from cisgender men and the global north when we're trying to figure out what we're finna do. So section 3, finna as in going to be en route toward, as in we finna come up. The term finna simplifies complex predictive analytic calculus and is used as a shorthand prepositional term that sets up an articulation of which reality among all potential realities is the reality that is in fact to come, or that a future reality is already present and it's only a matter of time until others recognize this reality. The finna as going to section is set in the future. Because the kind of predictive analysis we want to eventually develop does not yet exist, and because much of that reality rests on the cusp of what is certain, unambiguous language becomes difficult, if not counterproductive. As such, the third section takes a poetic form shaped after works like Greg Tate's Kalahari Hopscotch and Amiri Baraka's A System of Dante's Hell. Without going into too much details, the 16 sections open with discussion on finna as a link to omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. Here's a few of the sections. I want to check out the questions for follow-up first, though. They offer us temporal intervention into moral questions that might normally relate to spatial morality. I think it's important to apply a temporal lens on utilitarian problems. What if you gave Hitler's great-great-great-grandma a ride to the hospital? She bears a son which becomes Hitler's great-great-grandpa, and the butterfly effect as it applies to the moral implications of giving somebody a ride to the hospital. What amount of time is justifiable for us to ignore the plight of others? In another section, inventions for follow-up, includes the megascope and the sociological crystal ball that led to the megascope, the calm bomb mechanism whereby being shares feelings of oneness with the universe, space-time sculpting, the replicator, Trekkie fans will know about this, the machine in Star Trek where you can ask for a hot latte, an apple, or a gold-plated diamond, and these objects just materialize before you. If this came about, it would amount to a paradigm shift analogous to the arrival of the information age in the sense that the way that information is readily available in our world, in a world that would be post-replicator, resources would ideally be available in the same way because of 3D printing. This might hopefully put an end to scarcity and put an end to wars over scarcity. But so wrapping up, just as we should expect more Harriet Tubmans, we should expect more slavers and plan accordingly, at least for the near future. The world must recognize that Africa cannot remain in geographical, cultural, or historical isolation if human society is to be an open society. The problems we face are not insurmountable, though it seems that the more things change, the more they stay the same. If one takes up the view that we are somehow stuck in a deterministic society, then my reply would be Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. If the universe is probabilistic, then I would point to Niels Bohr and still say that we have far more agency in much deeper ways than we have even begun to understand. If Heisenberg was right, then we are not stuck in epiphenomenalism. Our minds are not overdetermined by the outside world. If Bohr was right, then our dreams become manifest via interconnectivity. Either way, we have access to fifth dimensional probability space, and this could be amplified by the synergy of our neural networks. We need Ubuntu so that everyone can win, as the only way we will win will be together. Black folks' position in the world on the bottom everywhere, having been ripped from time via transatlantic slavery or colonialism, places us in a special orientation to the fifth dimension such that it falls on us, the last defense rather than the avant-garde, to use our finna in such a way that we push the world away from the veil, away from the dichotomies that bind us. If we maintain Ubuntu, we can pull ourselves out of the current historical trajectory using finna and pull the world out with us. Finna is access to omnipresence, omnidimensionality, and a step toward omnipotence. Ergo, what we finna do is become godlike if we develop a praxis of finna and maintain Ubuntu. Considering how far we have yet to go, the most immediate solutions entail a search for new discourses. We are developing cheat codes, which does include code switching. We are hacking into and against any system that would say paradise is too chaotic, because why not? And our search for new thought, communication, community, praxis, and existence is not futile. The quest for better questions is only just beginning, the only just beginning, only the beginning, and only beginning. Thank you.